Welcome, everyone, to the League of Women Voters of Greenwich candidate debate. I am Sandy Waters, president of the Greenwich League. Which, no. This event is held under the auspices of the League's Education Fund, a 501c3 tax-exempt, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. Thanks to all 400 of you for attending virtually tonight. We are grateful to the candidates for sharing with voters their ideas for serving the Greenwich community in the Connecticut State Legislature. We also appreciate their support for our nonpartisan role and their willingness to participate under the League's guidelines. Civil discussion about what best serves the public interest is the responsibility of all citizens and is the bedrock mission of the League of Women Voters. Deciding who will best deliver results on that interest is equally important. We hope this forum will inform your decision-making. Voters may read further about the candidates on the League's website at www.lwvgreenwich.org under the Voting tab. By entering a home address, voters may use the Vote 411 digital guide to learn and to compare candidates on their local ballot from the presidency to the Greenwich registrars of voters and all offices in between. They can read candidates' bios as well as responses to specific League questions. Voters can confirm their polling location there as well, and this digital guide is a first for us in Greenwich. Voters may also download a PDF of the League's Voter's Guide for sharing, reading more leisurely, or for taking into the polling booth with them. This year's debate has been made especially complex due to the circumstances of the COVID pandemic. The League thanks First Selectman Fred Camillo for allowing us to use the Town Hall meeting room space, even though Town Hall itself is closed. We have agreed to follow the town's social distancing and masking requirements. Thanks as well to Kay Maxwell for moderating. Kay is a past president of the Connecticut and National Leagues. Her job is to ensure that both candidates, all candidates, have a fair and relatively equal opportunity to speak. To Nancy Duffy and Becky Gillen, League board members of different political perspectives, for reviewing, organizing, and prioritizing questions submitted by the public. They retained questions that all candidates could answer. Duplicates were removed to enable us to cover more material. To the volunteer League timers who will keep track of each candidate's speaking time. To the League's Aya DeSimone, as well as Craig Jones and GCTV for managing the technological challenges of ensuring that 400 plus attendees could see and hear 8 candidates and numerous volunteers. To Marla Laney, Kath Bergwager, and Aya DeSimone for the creation and posting of our voter's guide, but most of all, a heartfelt thanks to Joanne Stavru and Becky Gillen, who sweat bullets over a myriad of details that are invisible tonight, but that make a big difference to the operation of the event. Finally, thanks to each of you for your patience, if the technology demands it. There will be a virtual debate for the Congressional District 4 seat on Sunday, October 18th. Details are available on the League's website. Voting is a civic duty. I don't have to tell any of you to vote yourselves between now and November 3rd. Hopefully, you have also persuaded your adult children, your neighbors, and your friends, no matter what their political views, that democracy functions best when we all participate. And I'm going to turn it over to Kay Maxwell, who will be the moderator.
Thank you very much, Sandy. No applause necessary. Thank you very much. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us, whether it's via Channel 79, YouTube at Greenwich Community Television, or on a device of your choosing. It's also being recorded and will be available at lwvgreenwich.org in a few days. Our purpose this evening, as it is with any candidate debate, is to provide you with an opportunity to hear the candidates' views on the issues facing Greenwich and the state. The format we're using for tonight's debates is designed to allow the candidates time to discuss the issues. The only rule is that the total time be used by each candidate by the conclusion of the debate be approximately the same. I will be posing the questions, which have come from a variety of sources, as Sandy explained. The candidates are not restricted to 1 or 2 minute responses. Instead, they can take as little or as much time as they feel is appropriate to discuss each issue. Our goal is to encourage debate, even though it's within a limited time frame. The candidates will take turns being the first to respond to a question, and following the question period, they will each make a 2-minute closing statement. Members of the league are serving as timers, and they're going to keep the candidates and me informed of the time expended. And if a serious imbalance in time should occur, I will see that it's corrected. This first debate will last approximately 45 minutes and is between the candidates for the state Senate in District 36, Democrat Alex Kasser and Republican Ryan Fazio. To my immediate left is Alex Kasser, the Democratic candidate, and to her left, Ryan Fazio, the Republican candidate. And now to the debate. The first candidate to respond will be Ms. Kasser, and the question is, the Special Transportation Fund is going bankrupt faster than previously feared. By mid-2022, how would you fix the red ink? Tolls, higher fares, higher taxes? And if not any of those remedies, what are the alternatives?
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy, Kay, Nancy, Becky, Joanne, the entire League of Women Voters for hosting this debate. It's an honor to be here, and it's a special honor to be here on this day and this year, which marks the 100th anniversary, not just of the founding of the League, but also of the 19th Amendment and women's suffrage. And thank you, everyone who's watching from home. It is an honor to serve as your state senator, and I'm so glad that we're opening with this question because this was one of the issues that I ran on in 2018. We have an infrastructure crisis in our state. We have a special transportation fund that is now set to become insolvent 2 years earlier than expected in 2022, as you just said. And we have to address it. This has been a crisis in the making for decades, and we can't avoid it. That is why I took the idea of tolls, which every state on the East Coast has, and brought it to Hartford and fought hard for it, because really the choice we have is not whether to pay for infrastructure or not. We cannot let it crumble because it's the foundation of our economy and the reason why businesses will or will not move to Connecticut. We have to pay for it one way or another. So really the choice is, do we pay for our infrastructure 100% with taxes, which is the system that we have now, or do we pay half price by allowing out-of-state drivers who use our roads, millions of them use our roads every year, to pay half the bill? So it's really the question, do we pay full price or half price? I brought that to Hartford. I fought hard for it. Unfortunately, we lost the battle, but I won't give up.
Mr. Fazio, same question.
First of all, thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting tonight, and thank you to my opponent for joining me. There is not a revenue problem in our state for transportation. Connecticut spends the third most per capita of any state on transportation in the entire country. And that's on top of the fact that we already pay the second highest taxes of any state in the entire country. My opponent's proposal for $800 million of new tolling revenue in Connecticut, which equates to about $583 on the average family in our state, is only insult to injury. We have a spending problem in our state, including on transportation. We do not have a revenue problem. So my proposals to make the Special Transportation Fund solvent are fourfold. First, spend the money that's already designated to the STF on transportation. Stop diverting it to other parts of the government's budget. We've already rated the Special Transportation Fund $1 billion over the last 20 years. Second, we need to change the rules around construction in our state. Project labor agreements and other rules add as much as 20 to 30% to the cost of building, according to several studies. Third, we need an audit of the Department of Transportation in our state, which is wasteful. Finally, we need to prioritize the most high-value investments in our state. That means 95 Metro North, which is getting slower, and the Merritt Parkway. It means no more upstate boondoggles like the New Britain Busway and the Hartford train line to Springfield, Massachusetts, which is a waste of taxpayer money. We can do this without new taxes or fees.
Anything to add?
Yes, I do. Thank you. We have both a revenue and a spending problem, which is why tolls was not my entire solution. The entire solution to our infrastructure problem is also to have an infrastructure bank. And that is an idea, a proven solution that works in many states, including Florida. And that's how you can bring in billions of dollars in private funding, leverage public funding to magnify $1 in public funding becomes $8 to $10 that we can actually spend. That's how we get the billions of dollars we need to fix our failing bridges, to make our trains faster, and to really transform and modernize our infrastructure. And yes, we do need to make the Department of Transportation more efficient and more accountable. And that's exactly what my bill would have done, SB 70, that I did pass on the Senate floor. And another thing we need to fix is the way that infrastructure projects are decided and determined. There has been a system where they are given out as political favors to legislators based on seniority and other issues, and that's not right. We should be doing infrastructure projects based on the economic impact that it will have for the entire state. So taking a holistic view, having an infrastructure bank to multiply public funds with private financing, that's public-private partnerships, that's what it is, and also having a consistent revenue stream with tolls.
I'll just add quickly that the average person in Connecticut is paying about $1,000 for infrastructure in Connecticut, compared to the average person across the country, less than $500. There is no revenue problem for infrastructure in this state. So adding taxes and fees to families that are already hurting is just not the right thing to do. And the tolling bill that was advanced in the beginning of last year itself was tried to be passed with political favors themselves, including a new train station, a duplicative train station in Bridgeport to the Bridgeport delegation, and exemptions for the Danbury delegation, and so on and so forth. So the games are still being played. The public trust is broken. We can't tolerate any new taxes or fees on the working people in this state.
You ready for the next question?
May I just have one last rebuttal? Thank you. Hey, look, it's very easy to say no to new ideas. It's very easy to say no to everything. What's a lot harder is to actually come up with solutions that work. And in fact, our tolls bill was decimated because of Republican opposition, fierce opposition every step of the way. And every time we asked, well, what's your solution? How do you want to fund this? They didn't have a solution until the very last moment. Actually, in February of this year, they said, well, let's drain the rainy day fund. Let's drain our state savings account. If we had done that, if Republicans had been in charge this year and drained the rainy day fund, this state would not have been able to withstand COVID. That rainy day fund is what saved us and is what is putting us on a course of economic recovery.
Just briefly, I'm not saying no. I gave a 4-point plan for how to spend our tax dollars more efficiently. Second, the rainy day fund was built by the Republican budget in 2017 due to the volatility cap that was passed. And third, Republican support had nothing to do with the failures of my opponent's transportation efforts. The Democrats have 60% majorities in both houses of the state legislature, and they have the governorship. This failed because moderate Democrats wouldn't go along, because the people in this state rose up, because there was a grassroots effort against imposing tolls, because people understand that they're taxed enough already in this state.
All right, next question. Mr. Fazio, you're first to respond. 2/3 of Connecticut gun homicides occur in our 3 largest cities, and the victims are disproportionately people of color. If elected, what measures would you push for to reduce community gun violence? And are you in favor of increased funding for community-based gun violence prevention programs?
This is a very important question, and this is a civil rights issue. Public safety and protecting the most vulnerable is a fundamental responsibility of our government. That's why I'm opposed to the new radical policing bill that was passed in July by our state government just 2 weeks after it was introduced, with only one public hearing over Zoom, that's already leading to a spike in gun violence in our cities. In New Haven this year, the amount of homicides have more than doubled. That's the closest city in Connecticut with ongoing comp stats. We know that in Stamford itself, that there's been an uptick in shootings this summer since the bill passed. That's been reported by the Stamford Advocate, it's been reported by the Stamford Police, and even the governor acknowledges that there's an uptick this year in gun violence around Connecticut. We have pretty strict laws in this state about guns, but now, due to this bill and due to the backlash against proactive policing, we won't be able to enforce those rules in order to keep guns out of the hands of criminals, repeat offenders, people who are a danger to themselves and others. We need good proactive policing policies in order to keep our most vulnerable populations safe.
Ms. Kasser?
Thank you. I am very proud to be endorsed by both Connecticut Against Gun Violence and Moms Demand Action for common sense gun reform, because those are the groups, the foremost groups in our state that have been battling gun violence for decades. And together with them, we passed important gun safety legislation, in fact, 3 bills this past year. I'm committed to advancing gun safety and to upholding our current laws. We actually don't know where my opponent stands because he's never answered these questions from the questionnaires of CAGV and Moms Demand, which require a commitment to upholding our gun safety laws, and also a commitment to investing in community programs which have proven to be very successful in reducing gun violence.
Anything else?
I'll just say that I'm for rigorously enforcing the gun laws in this state in order to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and people who are clear present danger to themselves and others. The problem with the policing bill passed this summer, and I'll note that I was endorsed by the Stamford Police Association and the Greenwich Police Union, who are putting their lives at risk in order to protect vulnerable communities from violence. If we step back from proactive policing, that is what's going to put more illegal guns on the street. Banning consent searches, which is part of the policing bill, is going to keep illegal guns on the street. That's how hundreds of illegal guns have been taken off the street in recent years around Connecticut. So it's one thing to have laws, and we have strict gun laws in Connecticut, and it's going to stay that way. But you also have to enforce them, and that's where good proactive policing comes into play.
All right, next question, and Ms. Kasser, you're first to respond. When Hurricane Isaias made landfall, it left more than 800,000 customers powerless for 10 days. Eversource is accused of failing to respond, poor planning, and lack of information to customers and municipalities. What changes would you support to address these issues and help bring Connecticut into a new era of power delivery?
Thank you so much for that question. That was a devastating event for people in the state and also for our economy. The economy basically screeched to a halt. For 8 days, people couldn't work. So it was also a wake-up call, and I'm very happy to say that we have passed legislation that is not a complete solution, but it is a significant step forward on this issue. And, after that storm happened, I helped dozens of constituents who reached out to me who couldn't contact Eversource or Optimum. They couldn't get a person on the phone. They were, for the first few days, they were being stalwart and saying, okay, we can get through this, and not complaining. But after those first few days, people really started to be concerned, and with good reason, because they couldn't work, their kids couldn't go to school. It was really a devastating event. So during the storm, after the storm, I worked with Eversource and Optimum directly to restore service to people who had lost it and to get them to do their job faster. Then, when we went back to special session 2 weeks ago, we passed the Take Back Our Grid Act, which establishes a new dynamic between our public utilities and the public, the consumers that they serve, and puts more power back in the hands of the public by creating performance-based standards for for their power, but also for their executive compensation. So now we finally have performance-based standards which include customer satisfaction, communications, the speed at which they restore power. All of those factors will be determining how Eversource is able to function going forward. So we have more oversight over Eversource.
Fazio?
Half of the town of New Canaan, which is part of our district, was without power for a week. Many parts of Greenwich were without power for more than a week. That's totally unacceptable. Eversource failed in its primary responsibility to distribute and transmit energy in our state. But it's also the failure of our state government, which has had complete legislative and regulatory oversight of Eversource for many, many years and allowed the electricity grid to degrade to the point that we're the only state in the Northeast that had problems of this magnitude. My solutions call for three different things that will both reduce the price of electricity, which, by the way, in Connecticut is the highest in the continental U.S., which is a huge regressive tax on families in need in this state, but also increase the reliability of the electricity grid. First, Eversource needs to have its monopoly limited. It must not vertically integrate its monopoly into electricity generation, which gives it perverse incentives and distracts it from its base goal of reliability of transmission and distribution. Second, we need to bring more clean energy that's affordable into the fold, including hydroelectric power and imported nuclear power from eastern Connecticut and out of state. By the way, that doesn't mean we're building a nuclear plant anywhere in the state of Connecticut. That's not going to happen. Third, no more secret long-term contracts that are negotiated by Eversource, pushed by Pura, behind closed doors. We need an open, competitive process for how we're signing on electricity contracts in order to reduce cost, and we need to keep Eversource focused on its primary responsibilities.
Anything else?
Yes, please. I agree. We need more competition. And in fact, Eversource failed miserably in their performance. And by contrast, United Illuminating, which has only about 20% of the customers in this state, was able to restore power to their customers 3 times faster. So bigger is not better. And we should not have a monopoly for our power, for our public utilities. So I agree. We need more competition and in all aspects. Now, I will just say that nuclear and hydropower are not the answer. Both of those are incredibly devastating to the environment and also to human health. We need more wind power, solar power, and other types of renewable energy that are not damaging to the environment or to human health. And in fact, we passed in 2019, we passed a major wind power bill in Connecticut. So we're going to see this coming on the horizon and moving us towards a clean energy future that I'm very proud to support.
I'm glad you referenced that bill, Senator. That bill was HB 7156, which included a new offshore wind plant that Eversource is actually a party to. It's a 50% equity holder. And so now it's actually generating the electricity that it's also going to be selling to customers around Connecticut. But that bill includes wholesale electricity prices that are 9.8, 9.9 cents a kilowatt hour compared to the regional price of electricity, which is about 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So my opponent and many members of our own party, and actually some members of the Republican Party in Hartford, but not all of them, voted to actually triple new electricity costs that will come online in future years. So if you think your electricity bill is high now, just wait until this new project comes online.
All right, ready for the next question?
I just had one last point.
Yes.
We do need to do everything we can to reduce prices for consumers and to make sure that our power grid is resilient. It's absolutely critical to our economy and to the quality of people's lives. I will just note that in the Connecticut State Senate, there are 36 members, 3 of whom are employees of Eversource. They're all Republican senators, and I believe that is a conflict of interest. They all voted on the bill, and they should have recused themselves.
All right, next question. Mr. Fazio, you're first. Which Connecticut state government departments, agencies, or programs, if any, would you eliminate, and what is the annual savings you estimate the state would achieve from such actions?
So there are several programs in our state government that should be divested or downsized in order to save taxpayer money. One example would be Dunkin' Donuts Park, which is owned by the state government, which bleeds tens of millions of dollars a year of taxpayer money and would actually generate revenue if we sold it. The XL Center, which bleeds tens of millions of dollars in Hartford. It's a sports arena and concert center. We should divest of that. There are different programs, social programs, that could be where the resources could be shifted to some of our great nonprofits around this state, in this community, who would do a great job at providing very important basic social services at a lower cost than the state government. And there are other programs as well. There are savings to be had, but we need to focus on the cost. We need to focus on spending if we're to alleviate our budgetary problems.
Ms. Kasser?
I can't say that there is a specific department or program that we should cut. What we need to do is look for efficiencies in all departments and all programs. And one of the best ways that we could do that is to revamp the public pension system. And that's why I propose and I fought for and introduced legislation to create a shared risk program for public pensions that would reduce our overall costs and ensure full payment of pensions going forward.
Anything else? All right. And Ms. Kasser, you're first to respond. How can the state ensure that all the protections currently embedded in the Affordable Care Act do not disappear for Connecticut residents should the Supreme Court dismantle the Affordable Care Act?
Thank you for asking this question, because this is a real and present danger. On November 10th, the Supreme Court is likely to decide that people with pre-existing conditions will no longer be eligible for health insurance coverage, and that will be devastating to at least 100 million Americans. And it will drive up premiums and prescription drug costs for everybody else. What we have done in Connecticut is we passed a law. It was actually before I arrived, but it codified 10 essential health care benefits. And this is an example of what we can do at the state level to be a firewall to protect our rights when they are being stripped away at the federal level. I am very committed to achieving affordable, quality health care for every person in this state. That's why I supported the public option bill this year. That's why I introduced a public option bill for small businesses, employers, employees, and people under 30 in 2019. And I will continue to fight for that. And I would just like to note that my opponent has written an article in the Federalist that says you do not have a basic right to health care. And in fact, he has also said that the Affordable Care Act should be eviscerated.
If you're a single mom in Connecticut making $70,000 a year, about the median income, you have one kid, and you try to buy health insurance on the individual market, it'll cost you $17,000 per year out of pocket in premiums and in deductibles before your insurance kicks in. The federal system and the state system, which have been controlled by Democrats for many years, has totally failed the middle class. It's totally failed the working class in our state as it pertains to health care. Now, pre-existing conditions are protected in law by the federal government. They're protected in law by the state government, and that will always be the case. The problem that we have, which makes it difficult for people to access health care in our country and in our state in particular, is clearly the cost. That's the access problem. There are ways in which we can increase access and create healthcare jobs in particular in our state by changing regulations which restrict the actual production of healthcare, the amount of beds that hospitals or doctors can add They're required to go to the government for a permission slip before they do that. That'll increase the amount of healthcare, that'll reduce costs, that'll increase healthcare jobs in our state. And so we need to actually focus on the supply side, the healthcare side, rather than just the insurance side. Protections for pre-existing conditions are going to remain in law in the state government and in the federal government. The question is how we increase access by reducing cost and increasing choice in healthcare.
That is false. Pre-existing conditions will not be protected, and everybody can read that in the papers today. It doesn't matter if the president writes an executive order. The Supreme Court will rule the law of the land. And when they decide on November 10th that the ACA does not require insurers to cover those with pre-existing conditions, that right will be gone. The ACA will be eviscerated. Your dream will come true, apparently. But that leaves hundreds of millions of Americans in a desperate situation where healthcare will be unaffordable, inaccessible, and people will be in dire straits. And that is something that is terrifying, it's wrong, it's inhumane. I will be fighting against that. I will be fighting to ensure that at least at the state level, where we do have some authority, we can defend against that. And I will just, again, point to this article that he wrote in The Federalist, where he says that healthcare is a right that only socialists allege exists, and that it is not a basic human right.
First of all, that's not what the article says. The article says that you have the right to access healthcare and that people have the right to produce healthcare. And by doing that, we can increase the accessibility and the production of healthcare and healthcare technologies that have enabled people to live longer lives in present day and age. But none of this is addressing the underlying problem, that it costs $17,000 out of pocket to be insured for a private individual, a single mom, making $70,000 a year in Connecticut at present, under the Affordable Care Act, under the regulations and laws passed by a Democratic state government. We need to increase the supply and production of healthcare to reduce costs. We need to give people more choice in their health insurance, and we will protect pre-existing conditions. There is unanimous support for that in the General Assembly and in Congress, irrespective of what happens in the courts.
Anything else? All right. Next question, Mr. Fazio, you're first. This has been touched on briefly, but what specific ideas do you have to solve the pension debt crisis in the state?
A couple of weeks ago, I wrote an op-ed, and I've written several, about what our plan should be in order to alleviate the biggest millstone around the necks of the middle class in our state, which is the state budget crisis and the unfunded pension liability. In total, it's in excess of $100 billion, which divides out to about $90,000 for the average family. Most people can't afford that, and it's the reason that your taxes keep going up year after year in this state. We don't just need a financial solution, we need a legal solution in order to approach the courts and the political process. 40 states in the past 10 years have reformed their existing pension program in order to make it solvent or affordable. Connecticut was not among them. But the doctrine has been upheld at the Supreme Court that state legislatures themselves can make alterations on the margin in order to make their states solvent. They do not surrender the sovereignty that a state inherently has by virtue of the fact that they have unaffordable contracts. We must do this. We must reduce overtime spiking. We must reduce cost of living adjustments. We must increase employee contributions to their pensions and to their health care to levels that are still below private sector levels, but are more fair and commensurate with a fair level of pay. This can be done, but it can only be done by people running for office who are making this a cause of their campaign. And my opponent in July, when a 5.5% pay increase went through for state government employees, costing hundreds of millions of dollars to the taxpayer in this state, amidst the highest unemployment since the Great Depression, my opponent didn't make a single public statement against those raises, even though the governor had emergency powers in order to stop them. That type of equity and fairness needs to be at the core of the reforms that we make so our economy can finally grow in this state.
Thank you. I agree. We do need candidates who run on this issue and have a real solution. And that's what I did in 2018. And I brought a real solution to our legislature. It's called the Shared Risk Plan. I published an article in Bloomberg about it, describing it. It is a proven solution. It's what Governor Gina Raimondo did in Rhode Island to fix their pension debt. It is not draconian. It actually creates a system in which both employer and employee share the risk of market volatility. I also introduced an amendment to the Constitution, our state Constitution, that would require full funding of pensions going forward so that this crisis that we have could not be repeated, because it only came about because of 40 years of kicking the can down the road by Republicans, Democrats, by everybody. We can't let that happen again. We need to reform the system and make sure the problem doesn't repeat. I'd like to address what my opponent said about state employee contracts. In July, it is true, an increase did go into effect. That contract had been negotiated years ago, not by me. I did say something within our caucus. I did speak out and said, this is not a time for anyone's wages to go up. We should do something to create a freeze on state employee wages. What I have been able to do, how I have been able to use my vote in the legislature, is anytime a state employee contract was voted on, I voted against it out of principle, not because they don't deserve increases. This is for police officers and Department of Child and Family Services workers. They all deserve a pay increase. But on principle, I voted against those because we hadn't yet addressed our revenue problem. We hadn't created new sources of revenue, and our state was still in a state of fiscal instability. So I voted against all of those contracts.
My opponent actually didn't vote against all of those contracts. She voted against most of those contracts, but she voted for 2 of those contracts. That's the record. Her record isn't horrible on this issue, but it's not good, and it's certainly not good enough to make the state solvent. Additionally, her role in the Democratic Party gives her a platform, and calling out as unfair those 5.5% pay increases that went into effect on July 1st, doing so publicly would have made news. It would have raised eyebrows. There's no evidence that she did it in the caucus, but even if she did it in the caucus, once they said nothing about it, even though the governor had the ability to make alterations on the margin under his emergency powers, she should have come out in public and said this is the wrong thing to do. Democratic governors around the country suspended those raises for the benefit of the middle class, for the benefit of taxpayers under their emergency powers, including in New York and Pennsylvania and Virginia. We should have done that here. And leadership and speaking out on the issue for the months ahead of the point that the raises went through would have been the right thing to do.
I have stood up to my party leaders many times. In fact, unprecedented how often I have stood up publicly to my party leaders and pushed back on ideas that they introduced, and even on ideas that the governor introduced, like regionalizing schools, which would take away local control from boards of ed. But I also work very well with my caucus, and they do listen to me. And Ryan's right. I do have a platform to make real change, because as the first Democrat to represent this district in 90 years, we finally have a seat at the table with the majority party.
Just one point. My opponent says she's stood up to her party a lot, but she voted with her party 96% of the time in the state Senate. That's a campaign talking point. It's not the reality. I don't even agree with myself 96% of the time. I don't understand how anyone could agree with their own party 96% of the time. Those are the facts, and they're inescapable.
Ryan, What you should know before you make that statement is that 90% of the time, the bills we vote on are unanimous, and 95% of the time, they are bipartisan. So in fact, I only vote with my party 1% of the time. So I have taken many positions contrary to the party. I've also taken many positions with the party. I don't vote based on party. I vote based on policies and principles.
That only constitutes 14 votes total that you voted against your own party. You missed more votes than you cast against your own party. You missed 19 votes and you cast 14 votes against your own party. Again, that's the record.
Next question. Ms. Casa, you're the first to respond. Our state has allowed absentee ballots for all voters this year in light of the current pandemic. What permanent changes to our voting laws, such as offering early in-person voting, would you support in order to make voting a fair and simple process for all of our residents?
This is a critical issue because voting rights are determined at the state level by our state legislatures, and voting rights have become an entirely partisan issue. In fact, your right to vote during this pandemic was highly partisan. The Republicans sued Secretary of State Denise Merrill to block her from sending you absentee ballots by mail, and I have fought to expand voting rights, and I will continue to do that. I introduced legislation to allow early voting. I introduced legislation to allow no-fault absentee ballots. We came very close in 2019 to allowing early voting, which requires a constitutional amendment. Unfortunately, the measure failed because in the state Senate, Republican senators voted against it. And that is why we have to go back to the drawing board or wait 3 more years to try to amend the Constitution to allow your right to vote early.
Voting should always be easy and secure. And I'm actually in favor of expanding absentee voting, especially for this pandemic, where we should have no excuse absentee voting, but also in the long term where we should have more excuses. But Election Day is still a sacred thing in this democracy, and having as many people vote safely on Election Day is a positive if they can make it to the ballot box. Early voting would actually not alter the amount of voter turnout we have in this state. There was a Yale study recently that looked into early voting and found that there was no change to voter turnout when it was made available because it reduces the value of Election Day in the eyes of voters. So again, we need moderate solutions, not extreme solutions. And I think expanded absentee voting is the answer, but early voting and universal vote by mail is too extreme and reduces the security of the ballot box.
Well, 42 states would disagree with you. 42 states have early voting. Connecticut is an outlier. We are in the same category as Kentucky, Mississippi, South Carolina in terms of our restrictive voting rights. It is time, it is beyond time for us to modernize and to allow everybody to vote in a safe, accessible, and convenient way. And I will just say that the argument that's made that there is voter fraud that we need to protect against is also a lie. We went over all of the votes cast, the millions of votes cast in Connecticut in the last 25 years. There were only 12 cases of voter fraud. That means 99.99999911% of all votes cast in Connecticut in the last 25 years were valid. And one other point we have to note is that my opponent actually said in the paper when the issue of absentee ballots was still being debated this summer that we should only allow absentee ballots in this pandemic for people with pre-existing conditions and medical conditions. And I would argue it is not the role of government to decide who should be safe or feel safe and determine how people want to vote. Everybody has the right to vote in a way that they feel safe and to have their vote counted.
My position was that they should have access to absentee voting if they have health concerns, and only they can verify that. So that's reasonable because all the other exceptions, it's also the voter themselves who has to verify. But The idea that there's no voter fraud is not true. Just last year, the chairman of the Stamford, Connecticut Democratic Party was arrested and charged with 14 counts of forging absentee ballots. Just last year, the Democratic mayor of Bridgeport won his primary over a woman named Senator Moore because he clearly was cheating on absentee ballots. I don't think this is necessarily widespread, but it calls for a balanced approach, not an extreme approach in one direction that enables political party machinery to harvest votes and influence how people vote.
Anything else?
42 states have early voting. It's time for Connecticut to have early voting and more voting options.
All right, we are just about time for our closing statements. I'll ask one sort of quick question, and it would be Mr. Fazio's turn. Are you participating in the Citizens Election Program to finance your campaign?
I am.
Ms. Kasser?
I am not.
Either of you care to explain why you are or are not? Mr. Fazio?
Yes, the campaign finance laws in Connecticut are pretty restrictive. I'm not personally wealthy, so I can't afford financing my election on my own, so I work within the laws of the state of Connecticut.
I fully support the Citizens Election Program. It has done a tremendous favor to the citizens of Connecticut by allowing anybody to run for office and also to limit the influence of special interests. I chose not to participate because I didn't participate last time because I made a pledge to voters that I would not take state funding, and I didn't. And I'm not doing that now. And I'm not taking PAC money either. I am raising money from people who are committed to seeing me reelected.
All right, and on that note, it's time for closing statements. I'll let the timers shift. There are 2 minutes for each closing statement, and they will be showing you when you have a minute remaining and when you have 15 seconds remaining. And Ms. Kasser, you're the first.
Serving as your state senator is a tremendous honor. From the first day I held office, I've been fighting for you and for our state to succeed. I've done exactly what I said I would do. I've worked across the aisle, I've held both parties accountable, and I've led with real solutions and a positive vision. I fought for economic progress by introducing bold legislation to lower pension debt, modernize transportation, expand green energy, lower taxes, and help small businesses. Some of these ideas became law, others did not. But real change takes persistence, and I am persistent. The fact is that right now, Connecticut is on a good path, and if we stay safe and focused, we'll emerge from this pandemic better than before. But we can't let disinformation distract us. The idea that Democrats destroyed the state is a myth. The idea that Republicans can save us is also a myth, because political parties don't save us. Only our principles do. And even though Connecticut is on a good path, all the progress we've made is at risk. Our laws that protect public health, gun safety, the environment, education, the right to marry, and even the right to vote can be taken away. These rights are under attack from the White House and the Supreme Court, and state legislatures are the firewall to stop this. In this election, our Connecticut values are on the ballot. Thank you for joining me to defend them. Thank you for standing up and defending our democracy. Thank you for your courage.
Thank you. Mr. Fazio, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you to the League for hosting tonight, and thank you to my opponent for joining. My opponent, 2 years ago, won a close election by making big promises to voters. She promised to cut your taxes, but she voted to raise them by over $660 on the average family. She promised to be bipartisan, but she voted with her own party 96% of the time. And she promised to be an effective legislator more than her predecessor, but she failed to pass a single bill that she was the lead introducer of, despite 60% Democrat majorities. Now, clearly, it's time for a change. As your state senator, I'll advance a new vision to unite Democrats, Republicans, and people in between in order to put our state on the right path back to prosperity. We need to reduce taxes on all families and create jobs in this state, a state which never recovered from the previous recession before this new one began. We need to keep schools open. We need to keep schools open safely and reduce state influence over local school districts. And finally, we need to protect the public health and safety with good, moderate policing and public health policies that limit the spread of disease, reduce crime, but also protect people's rights fairly for everyone. This district is my home. I grew up here, and I will fight for it every single day in the state Senate. Together, I hope that we can change Hartford, save Connecticut, and restore hope for our community for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. We appreciate your being with us this evening. And I would just ask, as our candidates for state senate depart and our candidates in the 3 districts can come up and take their places. Pardon? Your choice. We try to keep you as far apart as possible, so your choice.
Who's going to be the first one to do the 2-minute?
In this order.
Oh, no, no. Okay, so then we'll keep
Yeah. You press the button when you wish to speak and push the button when you do not. No, he changed it. All right, is everyone ready? Timers ready? All right, then welcome everyone to the second debate of the evening, which is among the candidates for state representative in districts 149, 150, and 151. It's my pleasure to introduce these candidates. The first is a candidate for state representative in the 149th. So to my immediate left is Republican Kimberly Fiorello, and to her left is Democrat Kathleen Stowe. Next are the candidates for state representative in the 150th district. First, Republican Joe Kelly, and to his left, Democrat Steve Meskers. And finally, for the 151st district, Harry Aurora, Republican, and to his left, Mr. Arzeno, Democrat. And now to the debate. And the first candidate to respond will be Ms. Fiorello. And the first question is, a 2020 Forbes magazine study ranked Connecticut as the second least friendly state to entrepreneurs and small business. What would you do to fix that?
Thank you. Thank you so much to the League for hosting this debate. And thank you so much to all the volunteers on my campaign and all the supporters out there for bringing us to this date. Really appreciate your support. This is a major question for Connecticut. Businesses employ people, and we have to grow businesses in Connecticut so that they can employ more people. Connecticut's past governors and members of the legislature have passed laws and taxes that have made Connecticut, as cited in the question, one of the most unfriendly states for business. This needs to change. And the change really comes from not doing more of the same. I pledge to be a voice for the small businesses. As I have gone through this campaign, it has been amazing to be able to reach out and talk to so many business owners and to really sense from them, to hear from them directly, that it is Connecticut's taxes, Connecticut's regulations that have been such a burden. And in fact, not just Forbes, but Greenwich Time today had a list of mom and pop shops in Connecticut that have permanently closed.
Ms. Stowe, same question.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us. This is great. I'm so happy we opened with this because to me, it's all about the economy. And we're at a critical time for Connecticut. There's certainly a lot of financial pressure, but there's also tremendous opportunity. We have an urban exodus afoot. People are moving here, houses are turning over, and once people see how wonderful Connecticut is, they'll want to stay here. I've been jokingly saying on the campaign trail, let's have a New Yorker over for lunch. Once the people come here, businesses, I always say, come and they stay where they're welcomed. I know this because I've had 2 decades of experience growing businesses, and it's really funny. Just today, well, we've been thinking about it for the past few months, my company that I run with my father, it's called Jordan & Jordan. It's a financial technology company headquartered in New York City. We have 40 people. Most of them are in New York. We have a few people in London and also in Chicago. And because of this pandemic, we are leaving New York. That would have never happened because it's a financial technology company. We never thought to be anyplace else. But we're effectively working from home, we're growing, and for the first time we're saying, why not land someplace else? And why not have that be Connecticut? So I think that we should, as a state, be recruiting companies just like mine. 40 people, that's not so small. You get 40 people here, you have you're on your way. And there's a few things I would say. We have the key ingredients, but we need to enhance that by an economic development effort, calling on companies like Jordan & Jordan, streamlining bureaucracy and red tape. But one of the other ideas that I really think is important is expanding our state venture capital effort. Most of my career was in private equity. We do have a group that sort of finances or puts seed money into startups, but we should do more of that because then you can keep your talent here and grow your businesses here. That's part of what I would think of doing, and I think we really have the wind at our backs on this one. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for having us here tonight. This is a great question for me because when I moved here to Greenwich 22 years ago, I had a very fortunate career. And the career gave me the opportunity to relook at my life and decide, what do I want to do with myself? I talked to a couple of older folks because I really like to hear what they have to say. People with experience are always very interesting. And nobody that I spoke to ever said that, that you should spend more time working. So I decided at 22 years ago when we moved here to spend time with my family and volunteer myself to our community. But unfortunately, because I am such an entrepreneur, I opened up 2 businesses. Well, actually, a number of businesses in the 22 years. Presently, I run 22 businesses. I run 2 businesses. And the 2 businesses I run in the time here, nobody from the state has ever contacted me and said, hey, can I help you in any way, shape, or form? I pay my taxes. I pay my fees. I employ, I think last month, they're not the biggest businesses. Well, I think I employed about 35, 40 people last month. I signed the front of their paycheck, and basically I got no help from the state at all. Now I love Connecticut, I love Greenwich, and I want to stay here. And I don't care if I can run my businesses and generate the income from those businesses and pay 7% less taxes in other states, because the businesses are not necessarily local to here. I could take those businesses anywhere. But I love living here, and I want to change the fact that it's not comfortable for people to conduct business in this state. We got to lower taxes to some degree. We got to make it interesting for businesses to be here. Nobody comes to me and says, Joe, could you please stay here? We have to reach out to our business community and say, stay here. Somebody should call us and say, you should stay here because it's a good place to stay and this is why you should be here. Not only that, we should reach out to other communities. New York City's upside down right now. There's huge amounts of businesses in New York City in itself. We should reach out to New York City and say, hey, move to Greenwich. We're a law and order state. Certainly in Greenwich, we're a law and order city. You should come here, set up your businesses here. We could give you opportunities to make it worth your while to be here. This is what we need to do at the state level, and this is what I would like to advocate for. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meskers?
My highest priority going forward is the creation, the attracting and retaining a business to the state of Connecticut. The current fiscal situation of the state is more robust than people would have you believe. In the last 4 years, we've attracted over $3.1 billion into our rainy day fund. That rainy day fund should shepherd and marshal us through the next 2 years of the pandemic. We will have to engage in rationalization of our costs. We'll have to reduce our expenditures. We'll have to consolidate operations to improve the economic position of the state. But right now, we're sitting in an enviable position within the tri-state area. Over the last 10 years, the out-migration from Connecticut has principally been, or the single largest location has been Florida. But the combined following three are to higher tax locations. So while taxes are a concern to me, it's economic opportunity that's going to drive this. And I think that requires an investment in infrastructure, an investment in our cities, our failing cities, to attract those people. We're beginning to see that now in both population inflow into the state, and I think we're going to be able to see that going forward because the surrounding tri-state area suffers much more difficult fiscal situation than we're in. So I'm much more optimistic on where we sit today, and I'm looking forward to see the rebound in Connecticut.
Mr. Arora?
Thank you very much. Thank you to the League for organizing this debate. I'm glad to be here with my respected opponent, Hector. You have held up our 151st tradition of high civility and respect in our campaigns, and I look forward to this vigorous debate. Now, to the question at hand here, I don't think anybody doubts that we have driven away businesses. Yes, there are some coming in, but on a net basis, we have lost businesses. On a net basis, we have replaced high-paying jobs with low-paying jobs. Our governor's report says that. Everybody admits to it. Let's not really get ahead of ourselves that that's not the case. Now, how do we change it around? Remove onerous business regulation. If anybody who has dealt with the state agencies knows exactly what I'm saying. There's a million laws out there, and I get calls every single day. Can you help me with this? Can you explain how this works? What do I do if I have to open a barber shop, and what kind of things do I need? So the regulations are quite onerous. The tax laws, as well as the taxation laws, as well as the additional levies are very onerous, are very burdensome. They drive away businesses. And finally, we have nothing in terms of affordability. Electricity costs, 24 cents, the highest in the nation. It's a living cost, very high. So we are not a competitive state because of the policies we have pursued. And it doesn't have to be this way. It does not. It does not. We can change this by focusing on appropriate regulation, not over-regulation, by making sure that taxes are rationalized and not overtaxed, and by attracting capital. And I think we would definitely do well if we focused on those ideas. Thank you.
Mr. Arzena?
Thank you very much, and thank you to the League of Women Voters, to all the volunteers and the viewers for sharing time with us. We are facing an excellent situation right now with over 25,000 people moving into our state. Is an opportunity with a very solid and robust financial situation, with a surplus in the last fiscal year. We are attracting families and new companies. We have Amazon. We have to support our manufacturing and distribution business. We have to be sure that all the federal aid and the COVID-19 situation reach our local merchants. Greenwich and Connecticut and Fairfield have an excellent opportunity attracting new business with footholds in our state. We have to take advantage of these opportunities.
Any additional comment? Yes, go ahead.
So if there's anything that COVID has shown us, it is that these companies, they can actually move anywhere. Workers are able to be productive from anywhere. So we welcome everyone that moves to Connecticut and to Greenwich. But if we want to transform these renters into owners, we have to change how friendly Connecticut is to business and to taxpayers. Jumpstarting Connecticut's economy is a desire that we have had for a long time, and government has tried with fancy programs called First 5 Plus, or Small Business Express, or Manufacturing Express Acts. We have tried where the government picks winners and losers, where we loan out low-interest loans, give out tax credits, or grants to businesses. But studies have shown again and again that these kinds of programs where we're loaning out actually doesn't create broad economic growth. Sometimes the best solutions are simple, like simply lowering corporate taxes. That's the kind of mentality that I would like to bring, a principled approach that helps all businesses, especially the businesses that are here.
Any other comment? Yes, go ahead.
We have awesome human resources. We have an awesome state to work in. If we can stimulate the business by bringing these companies in here, that is the solution to the financial problem in the state. It's not working little plans to do this and move that over there. It's stimulating the economy. And you stimulate the economy by introducing and growing businesses. Bring those businesses in, it'll happen.
Any other comments? Yes, go ahead.
One of the things I have to say, too, is that to me, our business, if it was about taxes, Jordan and Jordan would have moved here a long time ago because we're paying taxes in New York City is a heck of a lot more. But it's about talent. And for the first time ever, one, you're in a work-from-home environment. In fact, one of our managing directors just moved to San Diego because he always wanted to. And we said, that's fine because you can still work for us effectively. But actually, also, as people move here, and since we are getting more and more people moving here, that increases our talent pool, and that's pretty exciting.
Okay, yes. Mm-hmm.
I would just like to respond to the comment my respected opponent made that things are excellent here. Things are not excellent here, Hector. There's so many businesses going out. There's so many small businesses going out of business. Look at Greenwich Avenue. Yes, there are some businesses coming in. I understand there is an opportunity coming in from New York City, but things are really bad. We are drawn down our rainy day fund. We're going to go into massive deficit very soon. So we need to really buckle up. And yes, a little bit of tailwinds we're getting, let's not get too giddy about it and give it away. We definitely should take advantage of it, but things are difficult right now in face of because of the pandemic.
Okay.
Absolutely, they are very difficult, and I agree that they are difficult with COVID-19, no doubt about it. But the state is in a very good situation to confront the cost that COVID-19 will have.
All right, next question. And Ms. Stowe, you're the first to respond. What are the top 3 road infrastructure improvement needs in our state for the coming 2 years or so? And is there budget availability to fully implement any of these priority projects?
Thank you. There's so many things that obviously we need to fix in terms of our infrastructure. And I would say the top priorities remain the trains. We have to actually think about the trains a little bit differently now because of the fact of the whole conversation we just had regarding commuting to New York. But still, that will matter. And of course, even within our state, having our trains being more effective, and then of course the merit and 95 and our bridges and our roads, all of those things we need to be focused on. Now, how do we pay for it? That's the next big question. I think all options have to be on the table. I know this is probably getting to the tolls question, which I'm happy to talk about. And that became such a binary issue, but I think that we need to be talking about, is that something we should be considering again? I know from someone that used to commute to New York City and has family in New Jersey, I've been giving them a lot of my Easy Pass funds for a while. So it's something I would certainly want to consider. And of course, we actually had tolls in Connecticut all the way through the 80s. So we should put that on the table, but more importantly, I think we should also be talking about potentially private-public partnerships, which we've also talked about as another option in terms of financing our roads. That is something that's worked well in some places and not well in others, so we'd have to really analyze that. Again, I'm taking the private equity perspective here. Everyone probably knows about the Chicago parking meter situation. In that case, the private equity group probably did better than the state, or the city rather. So I think that we have to look at all these options, and it's something I'd want to consider, but I'd want to analyze that very carefully.
Mr. Kelly?
Well, I think you asked about road projects, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, now road projects, unfortunately, I could only answer the roads I use, and that's 95 and Merritt as far as the state roads. It's a traffic nightmare, 95. You try to travel north at rush hour, you can't go anywhere. That's not good for business. That's not good for the state, and that's not good for what we need to do. We need to address certainly the traffic situations. We need to address the fix the roads certainly, and how do we pay for those roads? Now, tolls are something that's an added tax that we don't want to add to our citizens. Tolls are something that would cost somebody, an average person traveling from just a short couple of exits who happen to cross a toll, if they happen to need to do that multiple times, that could be an added burden on them specifically. Now, if you take tolls and replace that with other tolls and maybe have a direct lockbox opportunity to put that money into something where it's intellectual or intelligent tolls, where you maybe toll only the out-of-state truckers who are using our roads, not our local citizens, and maybe give exemptions to citizens that have to work, and maybe you really look at this in an intellectual way and replace the other taxes with tolls. Maybe it's something we could work with, but we certainly have to fix the roads, and they'll pay for themselves in just the opportunities, business opportunities, and the increased revenue that will be generated by further businesses.
Mr. Meskers?
If you look at the problems we face in this state in infrastructure, it's an old infrastructure. The investment dates back 100 years. If you look at the method of payment, it's a transfer of taxes from the residents of Connecticut to the state infrastructure. You have to ask yourself whether we're using the appropriate model. When 40% of the traffic is out of state and approximately 25% is truckers, and if you look at what truck damage does to your road bed, which is somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 times the damage done by a passenger car, you have to ask why we have decided to leave our roads as a multi-state charity for out-of-state users. It makes no financial sense. I would have hoped we would have come forward with a more progressive look at the toll situation, with a concomitant cut in sales tax or the gasoline tax, so that we could end up in a revenue neutral as it relates to Connecticut residents, and we could capture the revenue from out-of-state travelers. Now, in terms of the investments in infrastructure, I think the key investments are obviously in maintaining and repairing the roads and bridges, particularly in the rail system, some of which are over 100 years old and in danger of collapse. And I think the second, which we don't think of much in Connecticut, is our air transportation. And part of the proposal when we were looking originally at a transportation bill was to build out the Sikorsky Airport and the one in New Haven. And we could build a regional hub to attract some of the companies such as Amazon to the state. I think you have to look at where the opportunity and need is in terms of the infrastructure. Given COVID, there'll be a question about the resources between improving the rail times to New York, improving the personal vehicles depending on traffic. And I would argue that air traffic and accessibility into the state is probably a very strong need we would have. And that would benefit Fairfield County and major corporations who'd be looking to come here to make a transportation hub within our state.
Mr. Arora?
Thank you. I think the pattern is set. There are two parts to the question. Number one, what are the effective projects to be undertaken in infrastructure? And number two, how to finance them? I'm going to actually answer them reverse way, how to finance them first, and then we go to the prioritization. There are three ways, and I have put forward a plan on this. Number one is better capital allocation. We heard about the Bridgeport train station. We can't afford it, even if it was the right idea. $300 million. Infrastructure capital allocation for the state is really poor. Only last week we approved, and this is not infrastructure in the sense we understand it, a $200 million high school in Norwalk. And my friend here voted for it. $200 million. We all voted for the entire package, but $200 million when that project had been $50 million. It has got an indoor swimming pool, and so far, I don't think Greenwich High School has one, indoor swimming pool. The second is capital efficiency, which is using the money and making it go farther. We do a very poor job of it. And number three is attracting private capital, as my panelist here mentioned earlier, that we should attract better private capital. As a matter of fact, we are building parking garages using state money. No reason to do that. So using that, we can save $250 million in better capital allocation, $250 in the capital efficiency, maybe a little less than that, and $300 million in every year attracting private capital. That puts you $1 billion per year. And not only don't we need tolls, we can actually cut down that transportation debt. Now, where we're going to implement it is the areas, specifically the train system, but also reducing the congestion by using better methods, ride sharing. Ride sharing comes to mind, and we have to invest in those new ideas as well. Thank you.
Ms. Rossano?
Thank you very much. Let me tell you, Mr. Aurora, that Greenwich High School has an indoor pool, and it's part of my tour guides when I visit with new families, volunteering for the PTA. Going to the infrastructure, public, we have to look for options. We have to be smart. Public and private partnerships, better allocation of capital, of course, long-term leases of our state assets, a commission of lottery and gambling had been formed that will bring additional revenues that we have to use wisely. There are options, and we, again, are in a good opportunity to tackle them and focus in financing our needed structural projects. Thank you.
Ms. Fiorello?
Thank you. I think in principle, tolls can make intellectual sense. It's a user fee. You're going to use the road, so you pay for it. But in the reality of Connecticut, it did not make sense at all. And as a private active citizen, when I heard about the tolls plan to put up however many, I think it started at 80 gantries or more, and we would become the most tolled state in the country, we had to do something about that idea. I learned that the reason why New Jersey and Massachusetts and New York have tolls, but we don't, is because we actually get $700 million from the feds. That was the deal that we cut when we got rid of our tolls. So we can't do border tolls to capture those out-of-state drivers. These tolls would have to be in-state to capture us. The cost of operating these tolls was another $100 million. It was creating a new bureaucracy for the state of Connecticut. The cost of creating the tolls, given the way that we do construction in Connecticut, was about $300 million, and it would have taken a few years. Truly, the broken trust of the constantly rated special transportation fund, which we had to vote again for a constitutional lockbox. This was not an environment where the people of Connecticut would trust that the tolls would be as reasonable as they said, or if they even promised that we local drivers would have a different rate. And as for trucks, the trucks do pay a mileage fee, and they are coming to bring the things that we need here in Connecticut. On tolls, I helped to mobilize my fellow Greenwich residents to get up to Hartford to testify against this. We as citizens, this is a government that serves us, and we should exercise our voice more. So I would be very clearly against tolls coming back in the new session. Thank you.
Any other comments on that question?
Yeah, the question of infrastructure, it's a question of funding. And when I think about that, I think about Greenwich and I think about Fairfield County. And I think about the tax burden to our residents of Fairfield County. So when you want infrastructure, someone has to pay for it. And so it's either going to come out of your tax revenue, which we pay an inordinate amount of the tax revenue of the state, or it's going to be funded from third-party sources. So let me be clear. Am I in favor of tolls on residents of Connecticut? No. But I do not like running a multi-state charity. And I think that's not an intelligent way to finance the state, particularly when it falls on the residents that I represent. In relation to the high school in Norwalk, I am concerned about the dollar price of the school, but I know for a fact that the school is working in conjunction with IBM to have one of their internationally acclaimed P-TECH programs. So the fact that we can provide a model that IBM has used around the world to provide access to some of our less vulnerable or more vulnerable residents to access a higher education, to become productive members of society, I think we should support. And that's why I voted in favor of the bill.
Next question?
May I add that I think Greenwich elementary schools could use some more funding as well. We can modernize some of our schools. I think we can prioritize that, and that's exactly what I say about capital allocation. Capital allocation is poor, and that's because we do not get a correct, a proper hearing in the current one-party legislator. Thanks.
I would only suggest that the capital allocation in school projects are equally allocated across the state. The most recent allocations to Greenwich have been both Hamilton Avenue School and New Lebanon, where we received more than generous funding. Where we do have a problem is in the educational cost sharing, where there are attempts to balance out the inequality in education across the state, and there we do not receive our fair share. But certainly within the bonding I voted for, that would represent the bonding we would expect to receive within the state. And we have been well treated by the state for all of our capital projects.
All right, ready for the next question? Oh, sorry.
Oh, well,
Go ahead.
one last comment, and I just find this always disturbing when people point this out to me, that we pay in Fairfield County, much less Greenwich, we pay in Fairfield County, for every dollar we pay in tax money, we get pennies from somewhere between 4 and 6 cents back, some number like that people told me, and that's ridiculous. That has to be fought against. We have to defend ourselves here and make sure we get our fair share.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, when we talk about Greenwich Public Schools, I have to add my 2 cents. And I'm just so happy that Harry said that he's willing
Infrastructure, I think.
to help fund some of those elementary schools that we need so much help on. Because the average, Joe, you should remember too, I think the average age of our schools is 1954. And we certainly need a lot of help on funding. And I do think that having a seat at the table, especially as a Democrat, would be helpful, because more than ever, I really want to get some more funding back to Greenwich for our public education system.
All right, next question.
And I fully agree on that, and I will fully support any amount of capital and resources that we can get for our Greenwich public school system. Thank you.
Just one last point. Being a member of the Board of Ed as well, it's not necessarily Democrats or Republicans that's going to get us the proper funding to get us money to our schools. It's going to be working together, and that's what I plan on doing. This Republican-Democrat fight that goes on that just it just can't continue. It's going to be working together, and someone to go up there and work together and get the money we need to better our schools. Because the dates you just put forward, well, that's crazy. We have to update our schools.
I do have
Next
one
question,
more
because we
comment.
have veered off. The original question was road infrastructure, and we were in school. So I'm going to move us on to another question. And Mr. Kelly, it's your turn to be first to answer. Excuse me. We saw Black Lives Matter demonstrations in many cities and towns in Connecticut this summer. How are you planning to address the issues illuminated by these protests and to ensure that the voices of underrepresented groups are included in the legislative process? And Mr. Kelly.
I'm glad you asked me that question because I've dedicated the last 20 years of my life working with the kids in our town. I'm known as Coach Kelly because I have coached and we worked this out before the town has asked me or the party has asked me to run for office. Thousands of kids I have worked with. Each of those kids were very different. Some were wealthy, some were not. Some were many different races, and many of their voices needed to be heard. And what I did is made sure we created an environment on a regular basis that those voices were heard. Even to this day, many of the kids keep contacting me. Even I had a meeting in our first selectman's office yesterday about an incident that took place at the school where we're going to address this in a more meaningful way. A African-American gentleman found his sister crying because of a text message that infiltrated the school system's communication system, went out to everybody. And it was a disgusting message, and it was a hurtful message. And this young man came to me and said, "Coach Kelly, can you help me with this?" I said, "Sure we can. We can meet with the first selectman, Fred Camillo, a friend of mine, and why don't we meet in his office tomorrow night?" We went into that office, and we're putting a plan together. We called the superintendent today. We're going to make sure things like this don't happen because the underrepresented people need representation just as much as anybody else. Now, everyone matters, but we have to focus on those that need it the most at any given time. So I have dedicated in hundreds of stories of how I, going out in the middle of the night, finding lost kids, using the network I had with the coaching, finding kids who had problems, helping them. I've even taken in children to my own house that had problems in our community. Some got to be 10 years ago, an African-American kid lived in our house because he had a situation at home. He lived with us. I became his legal guardian, and he lived with us for I think it was about 9 months. And then he turned 18 years old, and then he had the right to move out and do his own thing because I was only the legal guardian of him. So his voice needed to be heard. His life needed to be changed. And I touched those kids. I lived that life of working with people that needed help. So for me, the voices that do not get heard need to be listened to, and people have to be more aware of that.
Mr. Meskers?
I think the statement, Black Lives Matters, you get it bandied around and you get it politicized. And you hear the same statement, and I think people say, Black Lives Matter, but Blue Lives Matter, but this life matters. And when someone comes up to me and says to me, "I'm raising money for breast cancer," I don't turn around and say, "I'm not interested. I'm only raising money for colon cancer." I think the statement Black Lives Matters is an acknowledgement that we have a persistent problem in the United States of equality. We have a persistent problem of acceptance and integration and opportunity. And it's a problem that needs to be addressed. The moral arc of the country is facing a question that you see day in and day out in played out on the radio and played out in the TV. And there's a cry for justice. And we need to be conscious of that. We need to know not just that we all and individually are responsible to help an individual, but we have to move the arc in our community and across our state to make this a place of equal opportunity. And we have to realize that acknowledging the issue that Black Lives Matter is an issue is because for 400 years in this country, they haven't. And until we're willing to make that acknowledgement, we have to ask, how do we get to be that city on the hill? How do we get to be that course of justice? And I think it's an overwhelming call to action that we have to be conscious of.
Mr. Aurora?
It is indeed a call to action, and call to action especially for education and for opportunity, because most of the accomplishment gap can be seen across districts where you have more minority African American children. I think we have to work to increase educational opportunity, through improving choice, to again refunding more charter schools where they are necessary and they can be the part of the solution, to doing whatever is necessary so that we do not still have schools in our school districts in our state which have 80+% graduation rate. So I think it's important to make sure that opportunity reaches not only some areas and some neighborhoods and some precincts, it reaches everyone. It reaches everyone. And it all starts with education. High school graduation itself is related to so many good things. The statistic is quite straightforward. Why can't we get that right? Why are we still arguing about it? And that's where I say the racial justice is going to start when education, opportunity, and equality before law are clearly and strongly established. And in both cases of education and opportunity, not only am I strongly supportive of it, but I've also put forward strong ideas to make sure that that happens. Thank you.
Ms. Tarzana?
Thank you very much. And is something, no doubt about it, that had reached us and had reached us in many parts of our country. Here in Greenwich, we have a diversity which had enriched our community. We have a peaceful march. We have people taking positions, and where everybody lives matter. Black lives matter, everyone lives matter, and this should not be a partisan issue. This should be where we all should work together, where our minorities feel protected in the state, in the country. As I repeat, it's something we don't see much in our community because of our diversity, but it's something that, yes, we have to address in our state and in our country. Thank you.
Ms. Fiorello?
This is a very, very difficult topic, but I'm glad we're talking about it. I wonder if I come at it at a different perspective. I feel profoundly that the founding of our country, the Declaration that said all men are created equal, and even those men were all different. Nobody is the same, but they actually acknowledged that they had a commonality and a natural right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's that founding idea that we continue to strive for. But racism lives in the hearts of some people, and you can't legislate that away. The antidote to racism is actually the founding of our country, that idea, which honors individual human dignity. It goes back to that simple maxim we tell our children: don't judge a book by its cover. But that actually requires that you read the book. So the solution in Connecticut to racism is not more sweeping legislation that divides us and makes assumptions based upon the color of our skin. I am a minority, and I am much more than my skin tone, as every one of us in this room and everyone watching would agree. We need to not have legislation that is based on more race-based thinking. Race-based thinking is very easy to go to, but it is primal, it's tribal, it's unenlightened. And as your legislator, I will always urge on the side of legislation that honors individual human dignity and that doesn't cut swaths, sweeping swaths across our society based on race-based thinking. I just don't go there. Thank you.
Ms. Doe?
Thank you. This is a tough question, and I don't think people, it's unintentional or purposeful. I don't think some people realize that there was racism in our society until perhaps we're seeing it more now, and it's become more obvious. And I actually went to some of these peaceful protests with my children because I wanted them to understand it. But I think the one thing we could all agree on is that education is often the answer. And so I know in the Greenwich Public Schools, for example, that we had someone, Joe, come in, I know I hired, to look at, for example, our textbooks and to see, are there things inherent in there that we didn't recognize and that's contributing to this in some way? We have to improve. We have to always get better. One of the things as I was saying to my children, they're relatives of Harriet Beecher Stowe. And when I think about it, 170 years later, what would she say? I think she'd say we've come far, but we have a lot more to go.
Any other comments? Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to mention this before, and not everyone is treated equally. And there's a lot of people saying a lot of things, a lot of talk, but what we all have to do is we all have to take action. And what I have done, as I mentioned in the last 20 years of my life, is taken action by actually doing something, by addressing this in my way with the people who are not treated as well as others. And it's the action that's the important thing. And it doesn't have to be high profile. It's very embarrassing for me to talk about what I've done over the last 20 years, because basically I've done it because I wanted to do it. They've now asked me to run for office because, well, I guess I'm a nice guy and I do nice things. And I don't like talking about this stuff. But I have been a man of action when it comes to the underrepresented people, certainly in our community for the last 20 years. And I hope everyone takes action. And that's really what I would like to see, because I've done that and I want to continue to do that. If I have a bigger audience because I get elected to office and could advocate for that, then certainly that I will clearly do that and clearly take more action. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Orseno.
In our community, we are very fortunate. I am also a minority, and I've been part of this community since 1986, and I would say that it's very fortunate how we minorities have been included in this community. And I am very proud to be part of Greenwich and this community, and I hope that the state and the country can be and take us as an example of how we are in Greenwich.
Mr. Aurora, did you have?
Yeah, I want to point to my personal story. I came to this country as a student with nothing, no connections, no money, didn't know a soul in the entire world here, no one. And over a period of time, through education, through opportunities provided to me, I'm just very lucky. I've settled down, raised my family here, and I agree fully with Hector here. This is not a political issue. I think what we want to make sure is that if there is some racism, let's just put it this way. Throughout my story, I have met racist people, but I haven't seen racism. It's a little different. There are specific people who you come across and you feel that way. I felt that way in my 26-year journey. But overall, our system is not a racist system. I want to say that, and that's my personal 25-year journey coming with literally nothing in this country. And I agree 100% with my friend here. This is not a political issue. We have to get better, and we do it together.
All right, next question, and the first to respond is Mr. Meskers. In anticipation of the governor's executive orders expiring, our state representatives will need to consider legislation that ensures that the current pandemic is controlled and that we are better prepared for future pandemics. What resources will you rely on for guidance in making these kinds of decisions?
I think the answer is a simple answer, and the resource I'll use to make decisions, I'll use science. I don't know how else to deal with a pandemic. We have some of the most advanced and talented scientists in the world. We have the best research facilities. The science that guides us and gives us the quality of life we have today. So you can go to the CDC, you can go to the National Institute of Health, you can go to Johns Hopkins, who, if you haven't, I would recommend you read the book called The Great Influenza, and the formation of the research arm of the Johns Hopkins and the reformation of our scientific community. So what I'll follow is science. It's not a hard answer there. I think the governor's standards and what he's done has given us some of the highest performance. Now the balancing act between the high performance on the pandemic is now the relief we need to see for our small communities, our business community, our economy, and move that forward. The only other thing I would say that we're facing, and we'll face it at the RTM where I sit, is that we will once again be asked to vote on a measure about face masks. And I just find it preposterous. And I just think we follow the science, and we've gotten to where we've gotten to in Connecticut, and I celebrate the science. I might be a little more pushy than the governor on economic opening, because I think we need to recover, but that's where I would be guided.
Mr. Arora?
Thank you. Yes, we need to rely on science. We need to work together, and we need to look ahead. You know, right now, the new cases per 100,000 has hovered around 4 on a 7-day average, and we need to keep it low. Under 10 is considered safe, but we were pointed today that New London and Norwich up in southeastern Connecticut, that number has gone to 25 or 30. So we need to be very vigilant. Now, I have always been looking ahead. So in late April, we all sat down and we realized that the real harm was was in nursing homes. So I pushed for a three-pronged plan. I called the governor's office, working together with them. I wrote an op-ed, and 2 months later, those 3 elements were adopted. I was very saddened that we didn't do them earlier because it led to loss of life. In nursing homes. In nursing homes of 22,000 residents, we lost over 3,000 lives. In education, similarly, we have to think ahead. This is a time for leadership, and that's what I have demonstrated, that we have to think ahead, come together. So in terms of education, we knew that we needed better virtual education quite early on from the feedback we were getting from a community. We advocated for that. We communicated. And I think all of us came together, and Greenwich is, I'm proud to say, Greenwich is one of the fewer school systems where middle and elementary are going full-time. And so we will lead, we will work together, and I commit and promise that I will make sure that we're ahead on the curve, ahead in this fight against the pandemic.
Mr. Arzeno?
Thank you. As we said, we have to rely on our health specialists. We have to rely on our leaders in our community and in the states. Connecticut is highly rated as a state that had managed the COVID-19 in a very successful way, despite the fact with all the costs that we had to assume. We have to follow them. We have to listen to the health specialists. This is not a partisan issue. This is something that we should debate what the science says, and we should work all together to come out of this pandemic.
Ms. Fiorillo?
I think a hallmark of a mind that seeks scientific data is a mind that's willing to consider different options and keep asking questions. Science is not set in stone. Science leads you to other discoveries. That said, my resource on where to go on COVID is my faith in we the people ourselves. I'm not sure why we're okay with the governor having taken executive power for himself for another 5 to 6 months. Other governors who have felt that they have a duty to oversee his people have extended their executive powers month by month. But our governor has taken it for quite a bit of time into the next year, the next legislative session, in fact. The people who know best how to handle COVID, whether it's restaurants, businesses, families, schools, parents, as we can see in the example, even among our schools, as we have so many schools that have had to respond to how are we going to educate our children. Just in Greenwich, we have the wonderful richness of having public schools, parochial schools, private schools, boys' schools, girls' schools, Japanese schools. We even have a burgeoning group of homeschoolers. And that just goes to show you that the best solutions, at least in the American way, is that you trust the people to come up to understand what's best for them. And that would have been what was needed for the Connecticut economy, and that's what works for Connecticut families. Truly, when you look at our schooling, is there one size that fits all? Some families have reasons why they need to be home during COVID. And they have to, we each have to figure out what is best. And for those reasons, when it comes to COVID, I think as the legislator, we should err on the side of letting people figure out what is best for them. When we legislate and have these big sweeping solutions, they can do a lot more harm, and there are unintended consequences, particularly with schools. We are hearing so much more about the consequences of forced lockdowns. Thank you.
Ms. Doe?
Thank you. I have a lot of real-world experience on this right now. First of all, the best thing would be if we could stop the virus, but that's obviously not going to happen anytime soon. So the next thing we have to do is open the economy safely. And I have to say, I feel like Lamont, our state just did a great job, and that was by being judicious and by being careful and by wearing masks. And I liked how we opened slowly and then we'd evaluate. We used data, we used science, and then we kept going. But a big part about opening the economy safely was opening schools. And we knew we could do it because of the fact that we were judicious and our state was doing such a great job. But this was also a decision that was left to us, which was awesome. And we surveyed our community, and our community said very loud and clear, 83% of them wanted to go back to in-person school. And there are many communities that couldn't pull it off. But you know what? We worked the entire summer. We were in Zoom meetings all hours of the night. And Peter Bernstein and I, as the chair and the vice chair, were constantly communicating to the community. We have to remain agile. We have to remain flexible. But this is the plan. It might change next week, but this is the plan. We worked so hard. Our administration did an incredible job. I think Gordon Beinstein put a really nice article in the paper recently saying, we don't want to do a victory lap. We kind of can. Because 5 weeks in, things can still change, but we have 5 weeks of school that when many systems haven't even opened.
Mr. Kelly?
If I'm feeling ill, I don't go to the plumber. I go to the doctor. And when it comes to what we should be doing with COVID, how we're going to advance with this, I listen to the doctors. Doctors synonymous with science. The experts is who we kind of have to listen to, take their advice. But we have to make our own decisions based on the advice we gather from the science, from the scientists, the doctors, the experts. There's a lot to do with us as individuals to decide what is the right thing based on our evaluation of all the facts. Kudos to the Gov. He did a nice job. I think our state's in a good position. I think he made the right calls. The economy is weird. It's a strange dynamic. I have, as I mentioned before, I run two businesses. Both of those businesses are doing much better than they have done before during this time, and many are struggling. One of the reasons why is because I'm in a commodities business where one of the commodities has mining volatility due to shutdowns due to the virus. So we have volatility. I'm on the hedging side of the business where we basically create the financial opportunities for buyers and sellers. My other business is a real estate development business. Boom time in Connecticut. It's wonderful. I had a property that I had upstate, and basically we just started building like crazy because all of a sudden there was huge demand out of nowhere. So how does that happen? How do you have so many in our state struggling and suffering and so many not suffering, so many prospering? The interesting thing about that is we have to look at those two dynamics. And when we make our decision how to open up, we have to somehow understand where everyone's not suffering. But we have to use the opportunity of those that are not suffering and then somehow combine that with those that are and still move forward in a cautious way. These are things we must do. And to your point on the BOE, a little story I'll tell, because you covered most of the ground of the stuff we did leading up to that. I sent out an email just the other day to the superintendent and the Board of Education. The email said in the subject column, I said test. And then in the body of it, I said, I think my BOE email is broken. We were receiving hundreds of emails per day about how we should open up, how we should not open it, how we should do this, how we should do that. In the last 8 days, it went quiet, which means we got it right. So we're quite happy. Yeah, we could take a victory lap for now. Knock wood, we're still doing well. So thank you.
Go ahead. Any other comments on this question?
Yeah, quick follow-up. So leadership is about looking ahead. Looking ahead, what we have to right now is if we have this run, and if we are right, can we get our high school to open up for more? Because we're still 50% right now there, and students are not too excited about it. But we have to be safe, because we know, as I mentioned, New London is having another outbreak out there. So we can't be really ahead of ourselves, but it's about time to think the next steps, because at this trajectory, the high school is going to be 50-50 or hybrid, maybe for the whole year. Perhaps not, if we step up. So we have to think ahead, both at the state level, at the school level, at our town level, and I'm going to be thinking and suggesting to the governor's office how we advocate for safe, yet further taking risk, calculated risk for our students. Thank you.
I will answer to that saying that we have our Board of Education, we have our administrators that I know they had been working tireless weekends, 24/7 to keep our students safe. I have many years of public school. I have 3 children that graduated from Greenwich High School. My youngest is a junior at Greenwich High. So I trust what our officials are doing, what the Board of Education is doing, and what our superintendent and administrators are doing in Greenwich. And I fully support them, and I follow their lead.
All right, and this will have to be the last question. Mr. Aurora, you're first to respond. Would you be supportive of codifying the protections of Roe v. Wade and a woman's right to choose in Connecticut's Constitution should Roe v. Wade be in jeopardy under a new Supreme Court?
So first thing here is that the Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. And let's not get ahead of ourselves. It is the law of the land. I don't like second-guessing Supreme Court judges. I don't like saying that they're going to turn down something which has had precedent for many, many years. And I don't like speculating on these very important issues. I think it's the law of the land, and that's where we are on this. Now, to hypothesize what will happen if the Supreme Court first takes that up, and then I don't think we should go there. I think it's the law of the land, and it's very well supported. It's got a lot of precedents, and we want it to be that way. Thank you.
Mr. Arzeno?
Yes, I will support it.
Okay. Ms. Fiorello?
Connecticut is already one of just a handful of states that does have state constitutional protections for the woman's reproductive rights. It's enshrined already in our state constitution. So I'm not sure why the question's asked. That said, on the topic, I think there's another conversation that we could have as the mother of a son, a teenage boy. When we talk about unwanted pregnancies, I think we should also be talking to our boys about them being responsible, because it does take two. And that's a conversation that I would ask my husband to have. But the conversation on women's reproductive rights, which is also about unwanted pregnancies, should include the men involved as well. Thank you.
Ms. Stowe?
I understand why the question is being brought up, because obviously with what's happening at the Supreme Court. It potentially could come back to us, and that's where it's really important that you understand how your state legislature would vote on this. But Kimberly is correct. It is already codified in our law. It's been that way, I believe, since 1990. However, we will have control if people try to chip away at it, and there is nothing I believe more in. Well, there's a lot of things I believe in, but a woman's right to make her own decisions is important to me.
Mr. Kelly?
Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. I also was informed as I was asked to run for office that it's also protected in the Connecticut State Constitution. A unique or good feature I think about myself anyway, maybe others might not think it about myself, but I do believe about myself, is I listen to people. I spend a lot of time, I don't make my opinion based on what I think. I make my opinion based on the input I get from others. I have not finished my thought process and where I land on this if there's a change involved. I still need to have that discussion, and I think I'm allowed not to make up my mind. I think I still need to have lots and lots of conversations about it. I have not been forced to have that conversation because it is the law of the land now. I want to have that conversation. If forced to make an opinion, I will have those conversations and I will have an opinion.
Mr. Meskers?
I think a woman's right to choose is a fundamental issue that we need to address and need to affirm when we talk about Roe versus Wade. I think it's a more profound issue as well about reproductive health. And what we've seen at the national level is a rollback in access to both health care and reproductive rights, whether it be abortion or birth control. And I think we need to reaffirm a comprehensive health care that protects a woman's health and her integrity and a right to choose. So I guess, in short, the answer is yes, and more so.
Thank you all very much. The time has come for closing statements. So I will ask the timers to clear their stopwatches. As I say, you're each going to have 2 minutes, and you will be shown when you've got a minute left and when you have 15 seconds left. Right? Okay, ready? All right, Ms. Fiorello, you're first.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for this debate. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for engaging in this debate together. My grandmother escaped from North Korea, and she probably never imagined that her granddaughter would one day run for the Connecticut State Legislature. I believe I am blessed to be an American, a citizen of a country founded on the ideals of human dignity that we continue to aspire to. Connecticut doesn't have the easiest road ahead of it, but we all strive for it to have a brighter future. I am a mom of 4 children with 2 dogs and 4 chickens. I'm a wife of 19 years. I went to West Point and Harvard, and after college, I worked on Wall Street. I worked in a restaurant as a line chef in New York City, and I worked as a reporter based out of Hong Kong for the Wall Street Journal, where I covered stories of economic recovery after the Asian financial crisis. In this campaign, I have met and listened to so many people. I have been endorsed by the Connecticut Realtors, National Federation of Independent Business, the Greenwich and Stamford Police Unions, and Governor Lamont's advisor on persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I listened and gathered this diverse group to back me because they trust that I will roll back excessive taxes and clumsy regulations because I respect the value of a hard-earned dollar. I will champion good policy and not sacrifice the interests of my district to appease party lines. And ultimately, I have faith in my neighbors to make the best decisions for themselves. Long ago, I saw a problem with a dependency on single-use plastic. I came up with a solution. I invented a bag, and I have a patent for it. The bag is being made now and sold. This type of innovative thinking, problem solving is what I will bring to Hartford. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Stowe?
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this debate. Thank you, Kimberly, and all of my colleagues up here. Opportunity to hear directly from candidates is the hallmark of our democratic process. My husband, Rob, and I have been your neighbor for the past decade. We're raising our 3 children here in the public schools. They are at Parkway and Central Middle School. I've been extremely active in the community. I'm a youth sports coach. I'm on the board member of the Northeast Greenwich Association, and I think probably by now you know that I'm on the Board of Education, specifically the vice chair of the Board of Education. I've spent 2 decades in finance. I began as an investment banker at Solomon in the technology group. I then was in private equity, and now I'm running a financial technology business with my father, who is a U.S. veteran. I truly believe we have an opportunity to grow again with the urban exodus afoot. We need to foster a strong economy, preserve our beautiful open spaces, support high-quality schools, and maintain fair and reasonable taxes. You've heard a lot of our views on policies tonight. But now more than ever, I believe you need to look at the person and their track record. We need to recover from this pandemic, fiscally and health-wise. When I was elected to the Board of Ed 3 years ago, no one said, how will she handle the pandemic? But the answer is, well. You need a person that gives it her all-night Zoom summer meetings, finds a way forward, is open-minded, has proven themselves in their career.
I'll just tell a quick story of myself and then mention why I think I would make a good state representative. I grew up in Queens, New York, very modest background, very nondescript student, probably lower than average, went off to an average college, and then I looked over and looked at Wall Street. I said, you know what, I'm going to give it a try. Started at an entry-level position. Years later, I had the opportunity to work in Tokyo, London, and New York, so I traveled the world for work and found myself in a senior managing director position. I built businesses within the corporate environment. I motivated people. I got a lot of stuff done. I reached my financial goals 22 years ago and said, you know what, now it's time. And I mentioned this before, but now it's time to settle down. But you know what, I didn't settle down. I worked more because at a young age, I learned a good work ethic is the secret to getting what you want to achieve done. I motivate people. I excite people. I unite people. I get people fired up. When I went into coaching, I started out just like everyone else coaches with you coach Saturday morning soccer, or you coach basketball, or something, you coach your kids. Then I found out that the coaching, the athletic situation became such a great environment for the parents, for the kids, and I went out to the next level and coached the high school. We created a program of just where the kids were empowered, not just the kids that were the athletes. We went to a no-cut program. We brought all kids in, and everyone was included, even kids that were special needs kids we had. We had a Down syndrome kid as one of our coaches. We just made it an environment that was great. Then we went on. I was given the opportunity to work in the Board of Ed because they said, we need your energy. We'd like your energy. I think it'd be a productive thing. And I think it was a productive thing. I think it was helpful. So the whole thing I have is energy, focus, motivation. I like to unite people. I listen to people. I work with people. I like being with people. And I think that now that they've at first asked me to do the Board of Ed, now they've asked me to go on to this, be a state representative, I think I could bring this energy, this fire to the state and help our problems. I think we need to work together. This Democrat-Republican fighting all the time, no one gets along thing, that's not going to work. That's not going to make it happen. We need to fix this state by working together. Sorry. Thank you.
By listening.
Mr. Meskers.
This has been a challenging year for many of us. On the legislative side, we've lost ground due to the pandemic. In the past 6 months, my time has been consumed with helping constituents receive their unemployment benefits. I continue to advise our nonprofits and local businesses with grant applications for the Payroll Protection Plan. I've joined our nonprofits and Brian Hulbert, our Commissioner of Agriculture, who's a newly appointed food czar, to address the food security issues, and we've created a coordinated purchase arm to ensure supplies and distributions to our food banks and our food pantries in Lower Fairfield County. I've been conferencing daily and now weekly with our local elected officials on the rollout of the Reopen Connecticut plan to keep our state safe. I want to thank the governor for his bold action and successful effort to stem the spread of the virus in our state. This is a job that ideally requires strong financial skills, and I have those. But it is more than that. It is a job of community outreach to the YWCA or the Boys and Girls Club or Meals on Wheels or Neighbor to Neighbor. It's about fixing street lights or getting the DOT to fix the roadbed near Exit 3 so a resident who called me can sleep in peace. It's about the Riverside Association needing better care and maintenance from the Connecticut Department of Transportation on Exit 5, or Byram needing their voice heard at a Portchester P&Z meeting for the old Terry Lodge development. It's about caring, it's about showing up, and it's not always easy, but it's the job I love, and I humbly ask for your vote.
Mr. Aurora?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us here today. I deserve your vote because I've demonstrated over the last year that I have the desire, the capacity to serve our community. As soon as the crisis hit, I jumped into action. I resolved to make sure that our community had whatever connection to the state programs that was needed. As a matter of fact, I have a short story. I got a call. I was helping so many of our constituents with the DOL, with unemployment claims. And I got a call saying, listen, you need to help me because I can't get through the difference between PUA and PUC and so on. So I tried helping her over the phone. Half hour later, she couldn't, and she was about to break down. I said, please don't. I'll just come over. I went over to her place a couple of days later. We fixed the problem. She said, I would have voted for you, but I can't because you're not in my district. I said, why don't you call your rep? Why did you call me? She said, because I'd heard that you're the one who cares. So I have served with all my heart. I have advocated fiercely for our community on various fronts. I have the leadership skills to lead on important topics of job growth, of income growth, education, environment, or healthcare. I work in a bipartisan way. I can work with governor's office in the current environment because it's the way the business is done, and in a friendly competition. I'm prepared, I'm experienced, and I'm committed. I ask you for your vote. I'm humbled and honored to have served for the last year, and I ask you to give me the opportunity to serve you again for another 2 years. Thank you.
Mr. Arzeno?
Thank you very much to the League of Women Voters, and it was a pleasure to share this table with all of you. My favorite part of campaigning is spending each morning talking to all of you, because that is what it's about, listening and bringing your voice to Hartford to ensure our district gets exactly what you deserve from Hartford. I believe in partnership over partisanship. I refuse to stoop to scare tactics. By working together, all win. I am Hector Arzeno, and I ask for your vote in this election, and I hope to serve you well if I am elected in Hartford. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, thank you all candidates for participating. And in addition to my usual thanks to timers and all those who put this on, we owe a vote of thanks to those invisible tech folks that are out there somewhere making all of this happen in this unusual time. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.